The interrogation room aboard the USS Iwo Jima was designed for psychological warfare. Nicolás Maduro had figured that out within the first hour of being held there. Everything about the space was calculated to create discomfort without obvious coercion. The temperature kept just cold enough to be distracting, but not cold enough to constitute abuse. The fluorescent lights bright enough to prevent any sense of time passing, day blending into night in an endless artificial brightness. The metal chair bolted to the floor, positioned so that anyone sitting in it faced a blank wall, their back to the door, vulnerable to whoever might enter. And the silence. That was perhaps the most effective weapon of all. Maduro had spent his entire adult life surrounded by noise. Crowds chanting his name or screaming their hatred. Cabinet meetings full of argument and debate. The constant hum of Caracas traffic outside his office windows. Even in the palace at night, there had always been sound. Guards making their rounds, distant music from the city, the electrical systems and air conditioning creating their own mechanical symphony. But here, in the belly of an American warship somewhere in the Caribbean, there was nothing. Just the occasional distant clang of metal on metal as sailors went about their duties somewhere far above. The isolation was absolute and intentional. He'd been in this room for 7 hours now, or was it 8? Without a watch or any external reference, time had become elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made it impossible to track accurately. They'd taken everything when they processed him. His clothes, replaced with the standard orange jumpsuit, his watch, his wedding ring, even his reading glasses. Everything that might provide comfort or connection to his former life had been stripped away. The door opened without warning. That was another psychological tactic Maduro had identified. No knock, no announcement, just sudden invasion of the silence. A man entered, mid-40s, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with military precision. Behind him came a younger woman pushing a cart with electronic equipment. Neither of them spoke to Maduro. They simply began setting up what appeared to be a large monitor and camera system, connecting cables and testing audio levels with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times before. "What's this about?" Maduro asked, breaking his self-imposed silence. The man glanced at him but didn't answer, just continued working, making adjustments to the camera angle. Maduro tried again in English, in case they were pretending not to understand Spanish. "I have a right to know what you're planning. I have a right to legal counsel before any interrogation." This time the man responded, his tone professionally neutral. "This isn't an interrogation, Mr. Maduro. This is a communication opportunity. Someone wants to speak with you. Whether you choose to speak back is entirely your decision. Your attorney has been notified and has the right to be present. But given the nature of the caller, we thought you might prefer privacy. Who wants to speak with me?" But even as Maduro asked the question, he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. There were very few people whose call would warrant this kind of setup, this level of obvious importance. The technicians finished their work and left without a word. The monitor remained dark. Maduro sat there for another 10 minutes, watching his own faint reflection in the black screen, before it suddenly flickered to life. And there, looking directly at him from what appeared to be the Oval Office, was Donald Trump. Maduro had seen Trump countless times on television, had studied his speeches and interviews, had even met him briefly years ago at a diplomatic reception in New York. But this was different. This was direct, unmediated by cameras or journalists or diplomatic protocols. Just two men, connected by video feed, about to have a conversation that Maduro suspected would determine the rest of his life. "Nicolás," Trump said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who held all the advantages. "You're looking rough. Federal custody doesn't suit you." Maduro said nothing. He'd learned in his decades of political life that sometimes silence was the most powerful response. "I'm going to cut right to it," Trump continued, "because I don't have a lot of time, and frankly, neither do you. You're in a very bad situation. The evidence against you is overwhelming. 20 years of recorded conversations, financial records showing hundreds of millions of dollars moved through drug trafficking operations. Witness testimony from people in your own government who've already cut deals. You're going to be convicted, Nicolás. That's not a threat, that's just reality. Maduro kept his expression neutral, though his heart was racing. If the case is so strong, why do you need to talk to me? Trump smiled. Good question. Here's the thing. We don't just want you in prison. We want information. We want to dismantle the entire network you built. The drug routes through Venezuela into the Caribbean and Central America. The financial structures you used to launder money. The corrupt officials in other countries who helped facilitate your operations. Most importantly, we want to know where you hid all the money. What money? Don't play stupid, Trump said, his smile fading. We know about the offshore accounts. We know about the gold reserves you moved out of Venezuela. We know about the shell companies and the real estate holdings. Conservative estimates put your personal wealth at somewhere between $6 and $12 billion. That's Venezuelan money, Nicolás. Money that should have gone to feeding your people instead of buying your mansions and your mistresses. I don't have billions of dollars, Maduro said quietly. And even if I did, why would I tell you where it is? Because I'm offering you a deal. A one-time offer that expires the moment this conversation ends. You give us everything. Complete cooperation. Bank account numbers, passwords, names of everyone involved in your operations. You testify against your co-conspirators. You help us recover every dollar you stole. And in exchange, I'll personally intervene with the Justice Department to recommend a reduced sentence. How reduced? Trump leaned forward slightly. 10 years instead of life. You'd be, 73 when you get out. Still got some time to enjoy whatever's left. More importantly, Cilia goes free. All charges dropped. She can go wherever she wants. Live however she wants. Your wife doesn't spend a single day in prison. That's the deal. The offer hung in the air between them. Maduro felt his mind racing, calculating, trying to find the trap within the trap. And if I refuse, then you both rot. You get convicted on all counts and spend the rest of your life in a federal supermax prison. Cilia gets 20 years minimum. You'll both die behind bars. And everything you built, everything you thought you were protecting, it all gets destroyed anyway. Because with or without your cooperation, we're going after the money. We're going after the network. We're going after everyone who helped you. The only question is whether you go down as the guy who protected his accomplices or the guy who was smart enough to save himself and his wife. Maduro thought about Cilia, held in a cell somewhere else on this ship. They'd been married for 32 years. She'd stood beside him through everything. The rise to power, the economic collapse, the international sanctions, the protests and the violence. Whatever crimes he'd committed, she'd been complicit in many of them. She deserved protection. But at what cost? The information you're asking for, Maduro said slowly. That's not just about me. There are people in Russia, in China, in Cuba, people who trusted me, who supported Venezuela when no one else would. You're asking me to betray all of them. I'm asking you to save yourself, Trump corrected. Those people you're worried about betraying, they're not worried about you. The Russians are already negotiating with us about Venezuelan assets. The Chinese are protecting their investments without you. Cuba's been backing away from your government for months. You think any of them are going to visit you in prison? You think any of them care what happens to you now that you're no longer useful? The words stung because they were probably true. Maduro had seen how quickly allies abandoned losing causes. He'd done it himself often enough. What about the people of Venezuela? Maduro asked. If I cooperate with you, if I help you dismantle the system I built, what happens to them? You'll install some puppet government that privatizes everything and sells out to American corporations. The poor will suffer even more than they already have. Trump's expression hardened. The poor have been suffering under your government for over a decade, Nicolás. Don't pretend you're some champion of the people. You're a criminal who destroyed one of the richest countries in Latin America. Whatever government comes after you, it literally cannot be worse than what you created. So drop the revolutionary rhetoric and deal with your reality. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about whether you spend 10 years in prison or die there. The brutally honest assessment cut through all of Maduro's carefully constructed justifications. Trump was right about one thing. The Bolivarian Revolution had failed. Venezuela was in ruins. Millions had fled the country. Those who remained were suffering from hyperinflation, food shortages, collapsed infrastructure. Maduro could blame American sanctions all he wanted, but he knew the truth. His government's corruption and incompetence had destroyed the nation he claimed to be protecting. "I need time to think about this," Maduro said. No, Trump's response was immediate and absolute. "This is not a negotiation where you get to consult with advisors and consider your options. This is a take-it-or-leave-it offer, and it expires when this call ends. You decide right now, Nicolás. 10 years and Cilia goes free, or life in prison for both of you. What's it going to be?" Maduro felt the walls closing in. This was the moment, the choice that would define whatever remained of his life. He thought about the recordings they'd played in court. His own voice preserved forever, documenting his crimes. He thought about Cilia, probably facing the same kind of pressure, maybe even being offered her own deal to testify against him. He thought about Rafael, his bodyguard who had betrayed him for money, about all the people who had abandoned him the moment he became a liability instead of an asset. What did he owe any of them? What did he owe to a revolution that had collapsed into corruption and failure? "No," Maduro said quietly. Trump's eyes narrowed. "No, I won't cooperate. I won't betray the people who trusted me. I won't help you dismantle everything I built. You want to convict me? Fine. You have the evidence. You'll get your conviction, but you won't get my cooperation. I'd rather die in prison than become your informant." For a moment, Trump just stared at him, as if genuinely surprised that someone would reject the offer. Then his expression shifted from disbelief to cold calculation. "You're making a mistake, Nicolás. A massive mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." "Fine," Trump said, leaning back in his chair. "Then let me tell you what's going to happen. Since you won't cooperate, we're going to make an example out of you. Not just a conviction, not just life in prison. We're going to make sure every detail of your crimes gets publicized. Every recording, every financial transaction, every corrupt deal. We're going to show the world exactly what you were. And Cilia, since you're choosing to protect drug dealers over your own wife, she's going to get the full weight of federal prosecution, 25 years minimum. She'll die in prison because of your pride." The threat hit Maduro like a physical blow. "You said if I refused, she'd get 20 years. Now you're adding 5 more years because I won't cooperate. That's not justice. That's revenge." "Call it whatever you want," Trump said coldly. "The point is, you have one last chance to change your mind. Cooperate fully. Or watch your wife spend the rest of her life in prison knowing you could have saved her and chose not to." This was the real leverage. Trump had been building to this moment from the beginning of the call. The reduced sentence for Maduro himself had just been set up. The real pressure point was Cilia. Maduro could accept prison for himself, could even rationalize it as martyrdom for the cause. But could he condemn Cilia to the same fate? Could he live with himself knowing that his refusal to cooperate had cost her any chance of freedom? "I need to talk to her," Maduro said desperately. "I need to know what she wants me to do." "Not possible," Trump said. "She's in isolation. No communication with anyone except her attorney. Which, by the way, is how you're going to spend the rest of your pretrial detention too. 23 hours a day in a cell by yourself. 1 hour of recreation alone in a cage. No phone calls, no visitors, except your lawyer. No communication with the outside world. That's the next 6 months of your life, Nicolás. Plenty of time to regret this decision." Maduro felt panic rising. He was trapped, completely and thoroughly trapped. Every option led to destruction. Cooperate and become a traitor to everyone who had trusted him. Refuse and condemn both himself and Cilia to die in prison. There was no good choice, only varying degrees of terrible outcomes. "Why are you doing this?" Maduro asked, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "You've already won. You captured me. You have all the evidence you need for conviction. Why do you need me to betray everyone? Why isn't it enough to just prosecute me?" Trump's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained hard. "Because we want to send a message, Nicolás. For decades, foreign leaders thought they could commit crimes, steal money, traffic drugs, and hide behind sovereignty. We want to show that those days are over. We can reach anyone, anywhere. We can gather evidence that will convict anyone. And if you cooperate, if you help us dismantle the networks you built, then other criminals thinking about following your path will know there's no safe harbor. No amount of corruption can protect you. That's worth more to us than just putting you in prison." It was about deterrence then. Maduro wasn't just a defendant, he was an example, a demonstration of American power and reach. His cooperation would be broadcast globally as proof that even presidents could be turned into informants. His refusal would be used to justify increasingly harsh sentences for others. Either way, his life had become a tool for American foreign policy objectives. "I won't do it," Maduro said, his voice steadier now. "I understand the consequences. I know what I'm choosing, but I won't cooperate. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison with my integrity intact than spend 10 years as a traitor." Trump studied him for a long moment. "Integrity," he repeated, almost laughing. "You're a drug trafficker and a corrupt dictator, Nicolás. You don't have integrity. You have pride. And pride is going to cost you everything." "Maybe," Maduro acknowledged. "But it's all I have left. Last chance," Trump said. "Right now, this second, you can change your mind. Say yes, and we start the process of reducing your sentence and freeing Cilia. Say no, and you both spend the rest of your lives in prison. This is it. Final decision. What's it going to be?" The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Maduro could hear his own heartbeat, feel the sweat on his palms, sense the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything he'd been, everything he'd built, everything he'd believed, it all came down to this single choice. "No," he said finally. "My answer is no." Trump's jaw tightened. "You're a fool. Probably. But I'm a fool who can still look at himself in the mirror. That mirror is going to be in a prison cell for the next 30 or 40 years, Trump said. "Hope it's worth it." The screen went dark. The call was over. The opportunity, whatever it had been worth, was gone. Maduro sat alone in the interrogation room, staring at his reflection in the now black monitor, and tried to process what he'd just done. He'd chosen prison over cooperation, chosen integrity, or pride, or stubbornness, over freedom. Chosen to condemn Cilia to the same fate, rather than betray the network he'd built. Had he made the right choice? He honestly didn't know. But it was done. The decision was made. And whatever came next, he would face it knowing that he hadn't broken. The door opened again. The same man who'd set up the video equipment entered, this time accompanied by 2 guards. "Mr. Maduro, you're being transferred to the special housing unit. Isolation protocols. No communication with other prisoners, restricted access to your attorney, monitored mail only. You'll remain there until trial." Maduro stood slowly, extending his wrists for the handcuffs he knew were coming. "Can you at least tell me how my wife is doing?" The man's expression was professionally blank. "I'm not authorized to discuss other prisoners." As they led him from the interrogation room, through the narrow corridors of the ship, toward whatever isolation cell they'd prepared for him, Maduro thought about Cilia. Was she facing the same pressure? Had they offered her a deal too? Would she make the same choice he had? Or would she be smarter, more pragmatic, more willing to save herself? He would probably never know. That was perhaps the cruelest part of his situation. He'd made a choice that affected her profoundly, but he had no way of knowing if she would have wanted him to make that choice. Maybe she was cursing him right now for throwing away their only chance at reduced sentences. Maybe she was proud of him for refusing to cooperate. Or maybe she was too focused on her own survival to care what he decided. The isolation cell was exactly what Maduro had expected. 8 feet by 10 feet of concrete and steel. A narrow bunk bolted to the wall. A metal toilet with no seat. A tiny sink that produced only cold water. and a single small window too high to look through. That provided a glimpse of sky but no actual view of the outside world. The door closed with a sound that seemed to echo with finality. Maduro was alone, truly completely alone in a way he hadn't been since before entering politics. No advisors, no guards, no supporters, no enemies, just him and his thoughts, and the choice he'd made. He sat on the bunk and put his head in his hands. 10 years or life in prison. That had been the choice Trump offered. But Maduro realized now that those weren't actually the only options. There was a third path, one that Trump hadn't mentioned, because it didn't serve American interests. Maduro could refuse to cooperate, but also refuse to be broken by prison. He could maintain his dignity, his principles, his sense of self. He could become a symbol of resistance against American imperialism, a political prisoner whose imprisonment only validated his ideology. If he played it right, if he remained strong and defiant, he might even become more powerful as a prisoner than he'd been as a president. That thought provided a small measure of comfort. Not much, but enough to get through the first night in isolation. 3 days later, Maduro received his first visit from Marcus Richardson, his attorney. The lawyer looked exhausted, carrying 3 briefcases full of documents and wearing an expression that suggested the case was even worse than anticipated. Maduro, Richardson began, settling into the chair across from him in the tiny conference room they'd been assigned. We need to talk about Trump's offer. How did you know about that? Because every prosecutor in New York is talking about it. You turned down a cooperation deal that would have reduced your sentence to 10 years and freed your wife. The government is furious. They're planning to make an example out of you at trial. Let them. Richardson leaned forward. Mr. Maduro, I need you to understand something. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Those recordings from the arraignment? That was maybe 1% of what they have. I've been reviewing discovery documents for 72 hours straight, and I've barely scratched the surface. They have financial records, surveillance footage, testimony from dozens of cooperating witnesses, intercepted communications. They have everything. Then we're going to lose at trial. Almost certainly, yes. Richardson's brutal honesty was actually refreshing. But losing at trial means life in prison. The cooperation deal was your only real chance at seeing freedom again before you die. Why did you refuse it? Maduro thought about how to explain his reasoning to someone who dealt in practical legal realities rather than ideological principles. Because some things are more important than freedom. I spent my entire adult life building something. Yes, it was flawed. Yes, it was corrupt, but it was built on an idea that poor people deserve dignity. That Latin America shouldn't be dominated by American interests. That there's value in resistance even when resistance seems futile. If I cooperate with the Americans, if I help them dismantle everything I built, then all of it was for nothing. I become just another criminal who sold out his principles to reduce his sentence. Richardson absorbed this, then pulled out a document from one of his briefcases. Mr. Maduro, I need to show you something. This is a letter from your wife's attorney. He slid the paper across the table. Maduro's hands trembled slightly as he picked it up and began reading. The letter was brief and formal, but its content hit him like a hammer. Cilia had been offered her own cooperation deal, testify against Maduro about his role in drug trafficking operations, and she would receive 5 years instead of 25. She had refused. The letter included a short personal message that Cilia had been allowed to send. Nicolás, I know what choice you made because I made the same one. We stand together or we fall together. I love you, I'm proud of you. I don't regret anything. Cilia. Maduro felt tears forming. The first time he'd cried since his capture. She'd made the same choice. Faced with the same impossible decision, she'd chosen loyalty over freedom. They would both go to prison, both spend decades or the rest of their lives behind bars, but they would do it with their principles intact. They knew, Maduro said quietly, looking up at Richardson. Trump knew she would refuse too. That's why he pressured me so hard about saving her. He knew we'd both say no, and now they get to prosecute us both to the fullest extent. Probably, Richardson agreed. The government plays these games all the time. Offer deals they know will be refused. Then use the refusal to justify harsher treatment. It's psychological warfare as much as legal strategy. So what happens now? Now we prepare for trial. We challenge every piece of evidence on technical grounds. We argue that the surveillance was illegal, that the recordings were obtained through illegal means, that the prosecution is politically motivated. We won't win those arguments, but we make them anyway. Create a record for appeal. And Mr. Maduro, we pray for a miracle, because short of a miracle, you're going to spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Maduro handed the letter back to Richardson. Keep that somewhere safe. I want to be able to read it again. Of course. And Mr. Richardson, thank you for being honest with me. I appreciate not being patronized with false hope. The lawyer nodded and began packing up his briefcases. I'll be back next week with more discovery documents. In the meantime, if you change your mind about cooperation, the offer might still be available. Trump's deadline was somewhat artificial. The government would probably still deal if you're willing to provide substantial assistance. I won't change my mind. I didn't think you would, but I had to mention it. It's my job to present you with all available options, even the ones I know you'll refuse. After Richardson left, Maduro was escorted back to his isolation cell. The guard who walked him through the corridors was young, probably mid-20s, and unlike most of the others, he spoke. You're that Venezuelan president, right? The one who Trump captured? Yes. My parents are from Venezuela, from Maracaibo. They left in 2017 because they couldn't afford food anymore. Because of you. Maduro said nothing. What could he say? The accusation was accurate. You know what's funny? The guard continued. My parents, they hate Trump. They think he's a racist and a bully. But they're glad he captured you. They're glad you're going to prison. They said you destroyed their country, and now you're finally paying for it. I'm sorry, Maduro said quietly. For what happened to your parents? For what happened to Venezuela? The guard laughed bitterly. You're not sorry. If you were sorry, you would have stopped. You would have changed. Instead, you just kept making things worse, kept stealing, kept letting your people suffer while you lived in palaces. They reached the isolation cell. As the guard unlocked the door, he looked at Maduro one last time. I hope you live a long time in here. I hope you spend decades thinking about all the people you hurt. That's real justice. The door closed. Maduro was alone again with his thoughts, and his choices, and his future. He thought about Trump's offer, about the path not taken, about what his life might have been if he'd said yes instead of no, 10 years instead of life, freedom for Cilia, a chance to start over somewhere, somehow. But he'd said no, and Cilia had said no. And now they would both pay the price for that decision. Was it worth it? Maduro honestly didn't know. Ask him in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, if he lived that long. Maybe then he'd have an answer. For now, all he had was the certainty of his choice, and the uncertainty of everything that would follow. The negotiation was over. The deal was refused, and whatever came next would have to be faced with whatever strength and dignity he could maintain. It wasn't much, but it was all he had left.